Welcome to Environmental News and Notes. I'm Marilyn Ellie, and today I'd like to share with you something that happened in my house. We had a party featuring Senator George Latimer and Nancy Vann, who is running for District 1 councilperson. If you're hearing this, both Senator Latimer and Nancy Vann are probably candidates that you will have an opportunity to vote for. What we're trying to do today is give you an idea of their position on different issues facing the county, like the airport, affordable housing, Indian Point. They were both quite clear and outspoken, as I think you'll find in the forthcoming video. So I hope you enjoy finding out more about your candidates. If you agree with them, I certainly encourage you to get involved. And they have regional offices if you'd like more information. It's not hard to find them on Facebook or on their website. So democracy really needs a lot of attention, and the forthcoming election is going to be one way that you can find out about the issues and pay attention to what's going on in our community.
And now I would like to introduce a most outstanding person, a great candidate, and someone who I think would really do well in leading us all to a better Westchester. George, come up please. George Latimer. Senator George Latimer. Thank you, George.
Thank you very much. George is just fine. I answer in public office to a lot of other, you Latimer? Yes, sir, I am, so you have to have a certain degree of humbleness in public office as you go forward. Anyway, thank you to Marilyn, Roger, those of you who have put this on. This is wonderful. You never know what to expect when you go to a party like this. I didn't expect this kind of quality music. I didn't expect I'd see such beautiful grounds around me. So it's my good fortune to be here, and I appreciate it very much. I am George Latimer. You may have heard that I'm running for Westchester County Executive. This past week, we had the Democratic primary, and I was the winner of that primary, and I appreciate those who supported me. And let me say, just fresh off of a breakfast I had with Ken Jenkins, if you supported Ken, I appreciate you coming out to vote. Because Ken and I think if you saw the primary, if you saw us last week in Peekskill or wherever you may have caught us, I think we ran pretty much an exemplary primary. We kept it on issues. There's mutual respect between us. There were some differences in our point of view, differences certainly in our life's history and story. But he is working with me, and I hope if there's an administration that I'm heading, that Ken's going to be a part of it. So I think wherever you came from during the primary season, that we need a united Democratic Party, and we need to reach out to independent-minded people and those Republicans that share our philosophy and our values in order to win the election. What happened last November was a shock to the political system for any of us who hold progressive views. I've been in public office for a while. I'll give you my resume in a few seconds. But the bottom line was that we saw a person who is totally unqualified to be president of the United States by ability and personality become president of the United States. And you can argue it was an angry decision by angry people. There's a host of different demographics that went into the people who came to his rallies, and they were anti-immigrant, and they were anti-this and anti-that, and pro a lot of bad things. But the bottom line was, under the system we have, he managed to get the electoral votes. Now we're watching him in office decimate environmental protections under the EPA. We're watching him try to instill fear amongst every person who is an immigrant in our society, whether they're here documented or not documented. I mean, his argument goes beyond just those who are undocumented. We're watching him rattle sabers with a maniac in North Korea, wondering if the skies over the United States are going to be filled with nuclear warheads before this thing is over with, bless you. Things that we wouldn't have thought possible. I'm even at the point where I'm about ready to reevaluate my position on George W. Bush as the worst president in my lifetime. And I think he's moved up a notch pretty comfortably. But the upshot of it is what the election of Donald Trump did is it made people who were otherwise not politically active say, oh my God, how could this happen? Well, it happens because the vast majority of Americans a high percentage of Americans do not vote. And it's even worse than not voting. It's not engaging in the process, not knowing who the candidates are, not understanding what the positions of issues are. It takes work to be a good citizen. It takes time to take an issue and understand it deeply enough to be able to judge between candidate A and candidate B. And you can get candidate A, and it could be a person who runs as a Democrat as well as a Republican, who can project glittering generalities and you get a sense of, well, he's a good-looking person, well-spoken, I guess they're okay, and then find out that you don't have the person you thought you had because you bought the sizzle and not the steak. And that's happened in American politics over an extended period of time. And although I'm a Democrat and I've been in local public office and different positions for a while, I have the same frustration that people who are outside the political process do, because when you're in the political process, you want to create change. I'll give you this most obvious recent example. So we have a Democratic primary this past Tuesday, September 12th, in which we had something like 15% round numbers of the registered Democrats come out to vote. And someone, said, well, doesn't that show that people don't care and all these things? And I said, well, it may show that. What it may also show is that when you hold a primary 1 week after Labor Day, and the first week after Labor Day is back to school for a lot of folks, that people aren't clued into a primary when you don't have people who read newspapers, which is the single best source of detailed discussion of public policy issues. Television and radio give you news nuggets just by definition of the amount of airtime they have to cover news. And you wind up with an electorate that doesn't know there's a campaign going on, doesn't know there's an election, doesn't know how to differentiate between the candidates. And we've had, in the New York State Senate, rational voting reforms that the Republicans have squashed at every turn. Early voting procedures. So instead of having 1 day to vote, you have at least 8 days to vote. You probably could have more than that, but at least a minimum of 8 days to vote. So you take the pressure off of people who may not be able to vote on that specific Tuesday. We have provisions for same-day registration, so that a person who is not registered to vote but realizes that there's a campaign a couple of weeks before the election can register that recently, as opposed to the provisions we have now, which stop a person from registering when you're a month out or even more than that. We have a primary day in September that ought to be in June. It ought to be a June primary day before kids leave school and people leave on vacation. Kids are home from college in June, so you get the maximum pool of potential voters. But we don't have those provisions because in New York State, our Republican friends don't agree with those reforms. And so it's not a shock that we have the turnout that we have. And then to make matters worse, of course, the Republicans benefit from this system because Democrats generally, we're the more competitive party. That was a good catch, wasn't it? With a more interest. I was a catcher when I played Little League Baseball, so I can't squat down anymore, but I still can handle the fast hands. The bottom line being that we don't get the turnout because we made it hard for people to turn out because the Republicans don't want a big turnout. They benefit from a low turnout. They have an activist core of people who are conservative. They generally are property owners. They generally care about taxes more than anything else. They don't care a whole lot about the programs that we believe in that would benefit society. And if you can narrow the pool down, if you can suppress the vote of people who live in apartment buildings or people of color or people who are young or people who are, fit in different demographic categories, you can win elections that otherwise you should not. So as one example, voting reform, it represents a challenge that we who run for public office feel frustrated by because we realize that there's a deep need for reform in this system. And most people think that those of us who are in the system, we support the status quo. We think this is a good system, though exactly the way it is, and many of us don't. So in my running for county executive, many of the issues, and we'll talk about them in a few minutes, we'll open it up to questions. I'm going to ask Nancy Vann to join me since she's running to be your county legislator and also a decision maker that you will vote for. Many times we start with the fundamental problem that Americans do not pay attention to government unless it's a problem in their backyard, unless there's something down the street or up the block or something that affects a specific interest area they have, then they get engaged in politics. Absent that, it's all stinks, they're all crooks, I don't care. And in that climate, the most conservative of interests win out. The most conservative interests have more money. We certainly have our liberal, wealthy people, but there's more of them that are conservative, more of them that want to see change that benefits the advantages they already have in the society. And so those of us who are progressive have to try to break through that. And we break through that when we don't have the advantages of money by the energy we put into these things. For those of you of a certain age, I don't think anybody here remembers a Franklin Roosevelt campaign. We all read about Franklin Roosevelt. In those days, It was people power. It was door to door. It was individuals reaching other individuals. We didn't have the newspapers in those days, and we didn't have all the money and all these technical ways to reach people. So the challenge we have in this election for the county government to change the direction of county government is that it falls to us as individuals, you and I as individuals, to do the grunt work that's necessary to reach out to people who are not particularly up to date on what the county government does, much less what the issues are. If I had one person, I had 100 people come up to me and they'd go, well, what are the issues? Meaning, I have no idea what your government does that you're running for. And that benefits Rob Astorino and the conservative Republicans, because they will organize those people who hold those conservative views. And by the time I go through the litany of the gun show and the Immigrant Protection Act and what we're doing with our fiscal policy and what do we do with Indian Point and how do we deal with infrastructure needs, the person I'm talking to is on overload and is like shutting it down because they have no basis with which to start. We have to make sure that Americans understand that if we don't care about this democracy, forget about this race, this democracy, we're going to lose this democracy. We're going to lose it. Donald Trump has shown that you can give him bread and circuses and you can win. And that's a scary thought. And if now if you're going to start to go through celebrities, if that's where we're heading, Taylor Swift is going to run and Kanye West is going to run. And now all of a sudden you've lost any sense of what policy ought to be and what implementation of policy ought to be. And yes, it's hard to talk about these things, but it affects your lives. And that is the beginning of where we start with this. My background, very simply, I'm 63 years old. I was born on the south side of Mount Vernon, South 14th Avenue. I grew up there. My mom was a factory worker. My dad was a maintenance man. He worked at Beach Point Club as maintenance, head of maintenance. My mom worked in a series of factories down in that southern part of Mount Vernon, right on the border of the Bronx. If you know the geography, McQuestion Parkway, South Street. I went to public schools, graduated of Mount Vernon High School, class of 1970. So I've dated myself twice now. I did my undergrad at Fordham University as a commuter. I went to NYU with a graduate degree. I worked in the private sector in the hotel industry, sales, marketing, for 20 years, and started out, postgraduate school, knocking on doors and making sales calls, and working my way up to doing market analysis on projects. And it was an interesting career, but at some point in time, after I'd gotten involved in public office, this became more compelling than that. So I made the transition to do what I do now full time. I first ran for public office in 1987, 30 years ago, when I was the tender age of 33, and I ran for the council, city council, in the community that I live in, city of Rye. That's my wife's hometown. That's where we moved when we came back from some corporate moves. Got active in the community. Rye is a very Republican community, and I was solicited to run for the city council because they were trying to fill a ticket, and that happens in Republican towns. You look for, you're a warm body, George, we don't know how smart you are, just run and bring some energy to the ticket. They knew I had sales background, and that's probably the most important background when you're a candidate, that you're not afraid to go up to people and say, hi, so I ran for office, and I ran diligently, and I was the only Democrat to win that year in a Republican town. Subsequently, without giving you the full resume, which even my blessed mother wouldn't want to hear, I've served in the county legislature and then both houses of the state legislature. The county legislative race, when I won it, was a corner of the county, Larchmont, Mamaroneck, Rye. No Democrat had ever won that seat before I won it in 1991. I was the first Democrat to chair the county legislature, like Speaker of the House, in 1998, and that was the first time we had a Democratic majority. And I'm very proud of some of the things we did. And the things that we did in those days were not me. It wasn't I, which, by the way, is one of the big problems we have in politics, both at the executive branch and the legislative leader branch. This idea that only the president, only the governor, or only the big city mayor or the county executive initiates ideas. We've lost the balance between legislative and executive branches. I blame the body politic for that. I blame the political parties for that. That the executives raise the money and they give out the favors, and when you're money driven in these campaigns, too much power goes right to the executive, and then you wind up with a Donald Trump or others, including Democrats, who exert too much authority and power. When you like what they believe in, you're good, but when you don't like what they believe in, they can jam something down Main Street, and it's very difficult to stop them. So you need a legislative balance to leaven out the power of the executive. And so in my experience in Albany, in both houses, I'm currently a state senator. These were difficult races. They were intended to be a seat that a Republican would win, and I had to raise money. I've been outspent in every race, but I've won the 3 races that I've been in. And I think all of that leads me to this point where I'm running against a 2-term incumbent, Rob Astorino, who projects a very smooth image, very good communicator. He comes out of radio and television as a profession. He's got a baby face, even though he's an assassin. He has an ability to speak Spanish fluently, which carries very well in the in the Spanish-speaking community, and he holds the most ultra-conservative views that have been hidden because being in local government, there's only a few flashes where you get a chance to see what his real ideology is. He intends to run for governor if he wins this race, and of course he intends to win this race. And the threat of what he has done already as county executive, as bad as that is, the threat if he ever became governor of the state of New York is infinitely worse. He's the guy that wants to stop the closing of Indian Point. That's where he's at. He's not accepting that this is a decision made in part by the business community, by the business of Entergy, and in part by Governor Cuomo and those who agree that Indian Point should be closed. And he's sued in court to try to somehow delay the implementation of the closing plan because this is his philosophy. It's his philosophy to rattle the fear on immigration, to acknowledge and to join in with the Donald Trump philosophy on immigration. You've seen the DACA decision. You haven't heard one word out of Rob Astorino saying anything relative to DACA that would make you think that even Paul Ryan has said that what Trump is doing in DACA isn't correct and we need to have a legislative response, whatever that might be. But Rob has said nothing about that. He is playing to that nativist instinct in his base, and he's counting on them being more motivated on those issues than we're motivated on the things that move us. The critique of his record is easy to do. It's not the same as me offering a positive image. So let me offer a positive image, and then we'll critique his record. Then I'll stop, introduce Nancy, let Nancy say a few words, and then take whatever questions you have until the rain gets more profound. First of all, the positive realities of things. This county government has been turned into an ideological exercise by a conservative Republican. I propose to turn it back to what I call a pragmatic problem-solving mindset. Now, what does that mean in everyday terms? We need affordable housing. I am pro-affordable housing. I intend for the county government to be engaged actively in finding sites anywhere in the county and adding to our affordable housing list. That is my proactive, positive position on affordable housing. We should have a partner in the state, and we need to have some partnership in the federal government, although under Trump, I doubt we'll get any partnership down there. I think what he's doing by having Ben Carson, since Carson is a neurosurgeon, I think he's expecting to do neurosurgery on HUD, and when the patient is finished, the patient will be dead. And that'll be the end of the federal involvement in housing if Carson and Trump have their way. But from a practical standpoint, to advance a positive vision of affordable housing, the county needs to use all the carrots and sticks at its disposal to work with those communities that have been reticent to do affordable housing, because you can't rely on Peekskill and Port Chester and White Plains and Mount Vernon to do all of the affordable housing. When pushed by HUD, places like Larchmont and Rye accepted and did more affordable housing projects. And shockingly, they weren't opposed by the people of the city, these communities, which tells me that there's a greater support for this below the surface than people have granted it. So positive position, I support affordable housing. An administration that I would head would move in that direction. The negative on his side, he fought the affordable housing decree. He fought it passionately. He stood in the schoolhouse door every bit as much as George Wallace did. He delayed. He cost us $35 million. By my count, there's different numbers that float around. He cost us $35 million. And the practical thing to do would have been to go down to HUD early in 2010, his first year in office, negotiate hard, hammer out a deal, go to Chuck Schumer, go to Hillary Clinton, help me with the Obama administration, get this thing done, get the compromise you can get, put it behind you. You're going to have to implement it anyway because it's federal court dictated. You're not going to slither out of that. He didn't do it that way. What does he do? He finally waits. He lucks out. Donald Trump becomes president, rubber stamps his document, the impediments to implementation of these things, and he claims victory. He claims vindication. There's no vindication here. We need affordable housing. You've got to build these units. The market will not put because of the value of land and the pressure of people coming out of the city, the market itself will not build affordable housing. It's more profitable to build market rate housing that's very high. You have to take proactive steps to have housing. Issue one. Issue two, immigration. County Board of Legislators has a proposal called the Immigration Protection Act. It's good legislation. If I were county executive, I would have signed it, and that would have been that. He vetoed it, which means you now need 12 votes to override a veto. You have 11. You have 2 brave Republicans who've crossed over on this issue. If a third Republican comes along, then it'll become law before any future term would happen. I don't know what's going to happen. I tend to think that he is working very hard to retain the remaining Republicans to sustain his veto, and the issue will not be resolved. If I'm county executive, I speak to the legislature and say, folks, if you want to send that bill again, you want to modify it, do your thing. You're legislators. You have a right to legislate. Send me a bill. I'll sign it. And then we will have what? An ideological point of view? No, we will have a practical point of view. Here's the practicality of it. And I've spoken to police chiefs in some of these communities with high immigrant population. Here's what they tell me. So first of all, we don't want to do the federal government's job. That's not our job. It's an ideological effort to try to root out people who are undocumented and send them back because you have an ideology that you want to enforce. He said, my guys have to root out, we have to deal with crime when it happens and where it happens. And the fastest way we do that in the community is to have relationships in the community policing, where people talk to us. So if somebody stole a car in the neighborhood, somebody in the neighborhood knows, and quietly they tell the police. And by getting that inside information, there's a better opportunity to capture the guy who stole the car. If somebody is in an apartment building, down the hall from you, and you hear him beating up his wife or his girlfriend, domestic violence, you call anonymously. You have confidence. The police come. They stop the action if it can be stopped. You implement, Trumpian policies, and you say every interaction as a police with every single individual on the police force or the correctional officer, you turn them into the equivalent of ICE agents. That dialogue stops. The woman down the hallway is not about to put at risk her or her husband's or boyfriend's immigration status. She's not going to put that at risk to call the police if she doesn't trust that the police are not going to root out her and their immigration status. The extreme example of Joe Arpaio, he cared less about real crime. He put so much effort and attention just on trying to capture people who were involved in being in the country without proper documentation. That was his total focus, and the things that he did were horrific, and of course he's been pardoned by President Trump. So it is practical for the Immigration Protection Act to take and codify into policy that which is practical intelligence, which is we are not going to be arms of the immigration. If we deal with a criminal, person who's committed a felony, serious crime, that's completely different. But the average individual, we're not going to worry about what their immigration status is. We're going to deal with them based on whatever information we have and go forward. So in 2 cases, housing and immigration, positively, I intend to put us on a practical standard of how we implement our laws and reverse what I consider to be an ideological standard. Gun shows is another issue that's come up. Guns are legal in this society. You may possess a gun. Like every one of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, either by statute or by court decision, we have modified what would be the unlimited right granted in the Bill of Rights. You have a right to free religion. But the nation at some point in time legislated that you cannot have polygamy. So our friends who were Mormons and had the religious practice of polygamy found that we made that illegal in the United States of America. Was that a restriction on their right to free practice of religion? Yes, because we have some standard. You can practice your faith, but we have standards that we create. You have the right to free assembly, but you can't go lay down in 202 just because you feel like it. Got to go to town hall, get a permit, get a park. You have your free assembly, you have your speeches. It's still free speech, but it's still free assembly, but it's within some context of practicality. The same thing is true with gun ownership. It is not an unlimited right. And there is certainly no constitutional right for a government to have in their exhibition hall a gun show, any more than pornography is legal to own and possess based on Supreme Court decisions. But I would not have a pornography show booked into the county center. It's a legal thing, but it's not a desirable thing. If you have a product that's legal but not desirable, if you're selling bongs or something, fine. Go find a private sector hall that will accommodate you. And in the case of the gun show, you can take it to the Dutchess County Arena if you want, the Rye-Town Hilton if you want, take it to the Meadowlands if you want. We're not trying to pass a law to stop it from happening in Westchester County. We understand it's a private environment, but we're not going to do it under the aegis of Westchester County. Why? Andy Spano banned those gun shows after Columbine. Why did he do that? Because the two young men in Columbine that killed their fellow students and their teachers were enraptured by a gun culture, a violent culture. Now, it might be that 8,000 people go to that gun show, and 7,998 people are just as fine as they can be. But two of them who go to that gun show and immerse themselves in that gun culture, throw a little Nazi memorabilia in there, a little Confederate memorabilia in there, gin them up against the government and all the changes that have happened in our society since 1960, things that they find objectionable, and they decide some fine morning that they're going to do what was done at Columbine, what was done at Sandy Hook, and you've opened the door to incentivize a behavior. More people in Westchester County by far do not own guns than do. That may not be the same statistic in an upstate New York County. In an upstate New York County, it's different, it's different culture. Fine, let them have their gun show. For our purposes, I don't want one at the county center. Early in my, Elizabeth may have gone already, she asked me some of the things I would do early on in my administration. Stroke of the pen, executive order, reinstitute the Andy Spano executive order, no gun shows. And then go to the legislature, hopefully Nancy Van will be sitting there, and I say, members of the legislature, if you would like to discuss and send me a bill that codifies into law my executive order, then pass a law, and I assume it'll be what we agree upon, and I'll sign it into law. Then, if I get hit by a bus, or anything happens to me, the next person can't take the executive order and reverse it, which is what's happened to the Obama executive orders. So if you have a board of legislators that you can work with, that has a certain agreement to what they have now, you sign that in, you lock that in. And I don't view that as ideological. I view that as pragmatic. That's pragmatic government. And I reject the counter-argument of the conservatives that say you just want to make it all liberal. No, I want to make it pragmatic. And pragmatic is what's best for the greatest number of Westchester people. The greater number of Westchester people do not go to that gun show. They do not think that's necessary. Now, then the guy says to me, well, what about the model railroading show? The majority of people don't have model trains. I said, yes, I don't recall anybody killing anybody with a model train, to the best of my recollection, nor a stamp and coin collection. They have a reptile show there. I'm not going to see any reptiles, at least the four-legged versions of them. I serve with some of the two-legged versions. And my wife is totally petrified, of any reptiles. So if I tell them I'm going to the reptile show, that's going to be another demerit. The upshot of all of this is to say, as I close my general comments, I have an intent for a proactive, positive, pragmatic administration. There may be things that are going to be very difficult to deal with, and the finances probably are at the top of the list, because I think Rob Astorino, in the way he has borrowed, the way he has gone into the reserve funds, the way he has overestimated revenues, the fact that he has not negotiated anything like current union contracts, which give us an obligation that's going to have to be met, the deferral of maintenance and repair of infrastructure. There's so many different things that he has put on the funeral pyre of policy in order to be able to say, I didn't raise your taxes. And then you find out, once you go through the process, a significant portion of Westchester people have had it raised in their property taxes. It is a function of having not just general levy, but also refuse and sewer district taxes and the assessment rolls and the equalization rates, but it doesn't matter. You said you were holding their taxes at zero, and for some significant number of people, their taxes went up. You didn't tell them the truth. You didn't say I'm holding the tax levy at zero for one part of the tax levy. You just want them to be fooled. You want them to be robbed. R-O-B''D. And he's a slick politician. He has plans to go on his way up to Albany as governor, and I think he has plans beyond that. But we have to say we're not going to accept that. And that's why I'm running, and that's why I'm going to put this time and effort in to beat him. And if you agree and you can help me and we win this, then we'll reverse the direction we're in. We'll have plenty of problems coming up, but we'll reverse the direction that we're in.
Thank you for joining joining us for this edition of Environmental News and Notes. I hope you learned a lot about county government and the position of some of the people who are running for office and would like to guide county government. It's up to us in a democracy, the citizens of Westchester, to make choices, and the better informed those choices are, the better we all are. Thank you again for joining us.
Nobody turn us around, turn us around.